circle. Was it a bird of some sort, or just one of those dots that swim before your eyes when you stare too long at the sky? It almost seemed like the mountain waving its hand as if to say that it was quite all right for him to wait until morning. He felt better then, and returned more cheerfully to the moving. It was long after dark before the moving van drove away. Becky crooned happily over her bottle, and the rest of them gathered in the kitchen for a late supper of sandwiches and canned soup. But David could not eat until he had found the courage to ask one question.
May I climb the mountain tomorrow?
And Amy muttered something about landslides, which were firmly fixed in her mind as the fate of people who climbed mountains. But Dad said,
I don't see why not. Do you?
And looked to Mother for agreement. Mother said,
Well, be very careful,
in a doubtful tone, and that was that. You never know what you will find when you climb a mountain, even if you have climbed them before, which, of course, David never had. Looking up the foot of the mountain, he had thought that it was a smooth slope from bottom to top, but he was discovering as he climbed that it was not smooth at all, but very much broken up. There were terraces, ledges, knolls, ravines, and embankments, one after another. The exciting part of it was that each feature concealed the ones above it. At the top of a rise would be an outcropping of strangely colored rock, invisible from below. Beyond the outcropping, a small stand of aspens would quiver in the breeze, their quicksilver leaves hiding a tiny meadow on the slope behind. And when the meadow had been discovered, there would be something else beyond. He was a real explorer now. When he got to the top, he thought, he would build a little tower of stones, the way explorers always do. But at the end of 2 hours steady climbing, he was ready to admit that he would never reach the peak that day. It still rose above his head, seeming as far distant as ever. But he did not care now. It had been a glorious climb, and the distance he had already covered was a considerable one. He looked back. The town looked like a model of a town, with little toy houses and different colored roofs among the trees that made a darker patch on the pattern of the valley floor. The mountains on the other side of the valley seemed like blue clouds stretching out over the edge of the world. Even the peak could not give him a better view than this. David gazed up the face of a scarp, which rose like a cliff above him, a smooth, bare wall of rock that had halted his climb. Halfway up the scarp was a dark horizontal line of bushes, something like a hedge. Apparently there was a ledge or shelf there, and he decided to climb up to it before he returned home. To scale the rock face itself was impossible, however. There were no hand or footholds. So he turned and made his way through the grass until he reached the end of the bare stone. Then he started upward again. It was hard work. Vines clutched at his feet, and the close-set bushes seemed unwilling to let him pass. He had one nasty slip which might have been his last if he had not grabbed a tough clump of weeds at the crucial instant. But oh, it was worth it. He felt like shouting when at last he reached the ledge. Truly it was an enchanted place. It was a long, level strip of ground, several yards wide, carpeted with short grass and dandelions. Bushes grew along most of the outer edge. The inner edge was bounded by a second scarp, a wall of red stone with sparkling points of light embedded in its smooth surface. David threw himself on the grass and rolled in it. It was warm and soft and sweet-smelling. It soothed away the hurt of his aching muscles and the sting of his scratches. He rolled over on his back and cushioned his head in his hands. The sky seemed to be slipping along overhead like a broad blue river. The breeze ruffled his hair and whispered. The bushes murmured and gossiped to each other. Even the sunlight seemed to hum to him as it laid warm hands on his face. But there was another sound, which now and then rose above these murmurs. Then it would fade and be drowned out by the breeze. Hard to say why, but it just did not seem to fit there. David propped himself up on his elbows and listened more intently. The sound faded. He had been imagining it. No, he had not been imagining it. There it was again. He sat up. Now he noticed that the ledge was divided by a thicket, which grew from the inner side to the outer. The noise, whatever it was, came from the other side of the thicket. David's curiosity was aroused, but it occurred to him that it might be wise to be cautious. The noise did not sound dangerous, but, well, he had never been up a mountain before, and there was no telling what he might find. He dropped into a crouch and crept silently up to the tangle of bushes. His heart began to pound, and he swallowed to relieve the dryness in his throat. The noise was much more distinct now, and it sounded yes, not only sounded like, but was someone talking to himself. Who could it possibly be? Well, there was only one way to find out. He dropped down on his stomach and carefully began to worm his way under the thicket. The branches grew very low, and the ground was full of lumps and knobs which dug into him with every movement. There were vines, too, and some prickly things like thistles, which had to be pushed out of the way without allowing their leaves to rustle. He progressed by inches, pushing with his toes, pulling with his fingertips, wriggling with the rest of his body. At last he could see light breaking through the foliage in front of him. He was nearing the other side. A bunch of leaves hung before his face. He hesitated, then pushed them aside gently, slowly, and peered out. He thought his heart would stop. Chapter 2, in which David meets the phoenix, and there is a change in plans. There stood an enormous bird. David had been to the zoo, and at home he had a book of birds with colored pictures. He knew the more common large birds of the world, the ostrich, the condor, the albatross, eagles, cranes, storks. But this bird, its shape was like that of an eagle, but stouter. Its neck had the length and elegant curve of a swan's neck. Its head was again like an eagle's, with a hooked bird-of-prey beak, but the expression in its brown eyes was mild. The long wings were blunt at the tips, the tail was short and broad. The legs, feathered halfway down, ended in taloned feet. An iridescent sheen sparkled on its plumage, reflecting sunlight from the scarlet crest, the golden neck and back, the breast of silver, the sapphire wings and tail. Its size alone would have been enough to take David's breath away. He could have stood beneath the arch of that neck with room to spare. But the most astonishing thing was that the bird had an open book on the ground, and was apparently trying to learn part of it by heart.
Vivo, vives, vive.
The bird read very slowly and distinctly, staring hard at the book.
Vivimos, vivis, viven. That is simple enough, you blockhead. Now then, without looking.
It cleared its throat, looked away from the book, and repeated in a rapid mutter,
Vivo, vives, vive, vivi... Oh, dear, what is the matter with me?
Here the temptation to peek overcame it for an instant, and its head wavered. But it said,
No, no,
in a firm tone, looked carefully the other way, and began once more.
Vivo, vives, vive. Quite correct so far. Oh dear, these verbs. Where was I? Oh, yes. Vivo...
David's head reeled as he watched this amazing performance. There was no need to pinch himself to see if he were dreaming. He was perfectly wide awake. Everything else around him was behaving in a normal way. The mountain was solid beneath him. The sunlight streamed down as before. Yet there was the bird unmistakably before him, undeniably studying its book and speaking to itself. David's mind caught hold of a phrase and repeated it over and over again.
What on earth? What on earth?
But, of course, there was no answer to that question, and he might have lain hidden there all day, staring out at the bird and marveling. had it not been for a bee, which came droning into the thicket straight for him. He had a horror of bees ever since he had once bumped into a hive by mistake. When he heard that dread sound approaching, his whole body broke into a sweat. All thought of the bird was immediately driven from his head. He could tell from the noise that it was one of those big black and yellow fuzzy bees, the ones with the nasty dispositions. Perhaps, the thought paralyzed him, perhaps he was lying on its nest. On it came, buzzing and blundering through the leaves. Suddenly it was upon him, so close that he could feel the tiny breeze stirred up by its wings. All self-control vanished. He beat at it wildly with his hands, burst out of the thicket like an explosion, and smashed full tilt into the bird before he could stop himself. With a piercing squawk, the bird shot into the air, flipped over, and came fluttering down facing him. Talons outstretched, hook beak open, eyes aglare. Completely terrified, David turned and bolted for the thicket. He managed to thrash halfway through when a vine trapped his feet. He pitched forward, shielding his face with his arms, and was caught up short by a dead branch snagging his shirt. He was stuck. This was the end. He closed his eyes and waited, too numb with fear to think or cry out. Nothing happened. Slowly he turned his head around. The bird, although it still glared menacingly, seemed undecided whether to attack or flee.
"What, may I ask, are you doing here?"
It said at last in a severe voice.
I was taking a walk. I'm awfully sorry if I bothered you or anything.
"You should not have come up here at all."
Well, I'm really sorry, but there's a bee in the bush here. I didn't mean to.
The fright had been too much. Tears started in David's eyes, and his lip began to tremble. The bird seemed reassured, for its manner visibly softened. It lowered and folded its wings, and the glare faded from its eyes.
I'd go away, only I'm stuck.
He rubbed his eyes on his sleeve. The bird looked at his dismal face and began to fidget awkwardly.
There. I had no intention of... I'm afraid that I... Stuck, did you say? Very easily mended, my dear fellow. Merely a question of... Here, let me look.
It crashed through the thicket to where David was caught, and thrust its head down through the branches. Its muffled voice came floating up.
"Take heart. There seems to be... just so. One moment, please. Bit of vine. There we are."
There was a snapping sound from below, and David's foot was released. He unstuck the snag from his shirt, pushed his way out of the thicket, and sat down weakly on the grass. Whew! At least the bird was not going to harm him. It seemed to be quite a kindly creature, really. He had just frightened it and made it angry by bursting out of the bushes so suddenly. He heard a flailing in the thicket, followed by the bird's anxious voice.
"Hello? Are you still there?"
Yes, what?
There were more sounds of struggle.
"This is rather awkward. The fact is, I am afraid that I am stuck myself. Could you..."
Yes, of course.
He smiled to himself a little shakily and re-entered the thicket. When he had disentangled the bird, the two of them sat down on the grass and looked at each other. They hesitated, not quite sure how to begin.
"I trust,"
said the bird at last,
"that you are not of a scientific turn of mind."
I don't know. I'm interested in things, if that's what you mean.
"No, it is not. There is a great deal of difference between the interest shown by normal people and the obsessive interest of scientists. You are not, I hope, acquainted with any scientists?"
No.
"Ah,
said the bird with a relieved sigh.
everything is quite all right then. I do hope that you will forgive my behavior. I am not usually so rude. The fact is that you gave me quite a horrible start."
Oh, I'm sorry I frightened you.
"Frightened, my dear fellow? I am never frightened. I do not know the meaning of the word."
What I mean is that you frightened me.
This seemed to pacify the bird, and David, to heighten the good impression, added,
Golly, you look fierce.
The bird smiled.